Welcome to African Folktales by Tammy. Please don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more interesting stories. Also share this story to someone who might be interested. Let's get into the story. In the lush green village of Eloramo, tucked away among towering trees and vast fields of golden crops, there was a young girl named Zuka who had always known love and warmth. She lived with her mother, Ijeoma, a woman whose hands were never still. Known across the village as a healer, Ijeoma used her knowledge of herbs, roots, and potions to cure the sick and bring peace to the troubled. Her home was a small hut filled with the sweet aroma of freshly picked herbs, and the walls were lined with shelves stacked with remedies and remedies to be. For Azuka, her mother's presence was everything. Ijeoma's calm, gentle voice could calm the most troubled of hearts, and her laughter could brighten the darkest days. She would spend hours by her mother's side, learning the ways of the plants, observing the delicate touch Ijeoma used to make her healing concoctions. It was in those quiet moments that Azuka felt the most connected to her mother, a sense of belonging she carried deep within her heart. To Azuka, her mother was the center of her world, but in the blink of an eye, everything changed. One day, without warning, Ijeoma grew ill. At first, it seemed like just a minor ailment, a cough, a fever, but soon the illness consumed her. The best healers from neighboring villages came, bringing their knowledge and remedies, but nothing worked. Days turned into weeks, and with each passing day, Ijeoma grew weaker. Azuka watched helplessly as the woman who had always been so strong, so full of life, slipped further away. When Ijeoma finally passed, it was as though the sun had disappeared from the sky. The warmth that had filled Azuka's life was suddenly gone, leaving an emptiness too vast to comprehend. She clung to her mother's memory, replaying their moments together over and over again, as if by remembering, she could somehow bring her back. But no amount of tears or wishes could change the reality that Azuka's world had been shattered. In the aftermath of her mother's death, Azuka's father, Uzochi, was left in a state of deep grief. He had always been a quiet, reserved man, but his silence grew darker after Ijeoma's passing. He no longer seemed to care about the world around him. He was lost in his sorrow, as though he had forgotten how to be the father that Azuka so desperately needed. His days were spent in solitude, his eyes clouded with pain, his once bright spirit dimmed. Azuka, only 8 years old at the time, felt the isolation settle around her. The house that had once been filled with laughter and light now felt cold and hollow. She longed for the warmth of her mother's embrace, but that comfort was no longer there. And even though her father was physically present, he seemed to be a stranger, his gaze always distant, as if he too had lost the ability to see her. The loneliness was suffocating. Azuka tried to reach out to her father, but he had withdrawn too far. He was not the man he had been before. It felt like the world had shifted, and in its place there was only a void. She spent most of her days in the small garden her mother had tended, trying to find solace in the plants, as though they could offer her some comfort. But the world outside was changing, and soon Uzochi made a decision that would change Azuka's life forever. 2 years after Ijeoma's death, Uzochi remarried. His new wife, Kemi, entered their lives like a storm. She was a woman with sharp eyes, a proud posture, and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. Azuka watched silently as her father became captivated by this new woman. Kemi's arrival in the house didn't bring warmth or joy. It brought tension, silence, and a creeping discomfort that Azuka couldn't shake. Something in Kemi's presence made Azuka uneasy, as if the home she had once known was no longer hers. But her father seemed blind to it, caught up in his own emotions. The house became quieter, colder. His love for Azuka seemed to disappear entirely. Azuka tried to find her place in this new family dynamic, but it was like trying to fit into a puzzle with missing pieces. She missed her mother more than ever, and now she felt abandoned by her father too. Little did Azuka know, this new chapter in their lives was about to take a turn that would test her in ways she could never imagine. The moment Kemi entered their home, Azuka could feel the change in the air. Her father's eyes, once filled with love for her mother, seemed clouded and distant. Kemi, with her sharp features and cold demeanor, did little to ease the void that had settled in Azuka's heart. Her mother had been the heartbeat of the house, but now the walls felt empty, and the warmth that had once embraced their home was gone. At first, Kimi seemed like an acceptable stepmother. She made an effort to bond with Azuka, offering kind words and sweet gestures, as though trying to show that she was not the villain Azuka feared. However, Azuka soon realized that Kimi's kindness was superficial, masking a bitterness that ran deep. Every time Azuka spoke of her mother or showed interest in continuing her mother's healing practices, Kimi's attitude soured. "You'll never be like your mother," Kimi would say with a dismissive wave. "She was a healer and you're just a child. Don't waste your time trying to live up to a ghost." Azuka didn't understand why Kimi was so angry with her. Her mother had been gone for years now, and yet Kimi's cruelty never waned. Kimi would mock Azuka's attempts to learn herbal remedies, telling her that the knowledge passed down from her mother was meaningless. "You have no place in this world of healing," she would sneer, making Azuka feel small and insignificant. As the months passed, Azuka began to shrink in on herself. She kept to her room, avoiding Kimi's sharp remarks and her father's increasingly cold presence. Uzochi had become a mere shadow of the man he once was. The love he had once shown his daughter had faded into apathy. He seemed more interested in keeping Kemi happy than in noticing his own daughter's suffering. Azuka tried to talk to him, tried to reach out, but every time she did, her father would turn away, retreating into his own quiet sorrow. It was as though Kemi had cast a spell on him, and Azuka was invisible to him now. There were days when she sat beside him, desperately seeking the warmth and affection she used to receive, but he would simply look past her, as if she no longer existed. The hurt she felt from her father's indifference stung deeper than any words. One evening, after Azuka had helped Kimi with some chores, she made the mistake of spilling a jar of precious herbs. The herbs were expensive and Kimi had been saving them for a special order. Azuka could sense the tension in the air before Kemi spoke. "You careless, foolish girl," Kemi yelled, her voice sharp and cutting. "Do you have any idea how important this is? Do you enjoy ruining everything?" Azuka tried to apologize, her voice trembling, but Kemi would not have it. She grabbed Azuka by the arm and yanked her toward the door. "Get out," Kimi screamed, her eyes filled with fury. "I've had enough of your incompetence. Leave, you're a burden to this family." Azuka's heart pounded in her chest as Kemi's words echoed in her mind. Her father stood in the doorway, silent as ever. He said nothing, he didn't even look at her. For the first time, Azuka realized with a horrible clarity that she had been abandoned. In that moment, she knew her father, the man who had once been her protector, had turned his back on her. Tears filled Azuka's eyes, but she didn't argue. She was too tired to fight anymore. She packed her things quickly, her hands shaking as she grabbed the few belongings she could call her own. She gave one last look to her father, but he never met her gaze. She left the house that night, the weight of betrayal heavy on her shoulders. With no words, no farewells, and no love to carry her, Azuka stepped into the unknown, uncertain of what lay ahead. The days following Kemi's arrival felt like a never-ending struggle for Azuka. It was as though the once warm and welcoming home had transformed into a cold, foreign place. The distance between Azuka and her father grew wider each day, and the sharp edge of Kimi's cruelty became more pronounced. Azuka, now 10 years old, felt as though she were walking through life in a fog, unable to find her footing in the world that had once felt safe and secure. It wasn't just Kemi's words that stung, it was the way she looked at Azuka, as if the mere sight of her disgusted her. Kemi would often make passive-aggressive comments, sneering at Azuka's attempts to be useful. "Your mother's legacy isn't for you," Kemi would say as Azuka tried to pick up the craft of healing that had once been passed down from Ijeoma. "You're just a child. Stick to what you're good at, nothing." Azuka tried to avoid her stepmother as much as possible, retreating to the small garden that Ijeoma had loved. The garden was the only place that brought Azuka any peace, surrounded by the plants that her mother had tended with such care. She felt a deep connection to it, as though the plants could still feel her mother's love and guidance. Every time she worked with the herbs, she could almost hear her mother's voice, soothing and kind, reminding her of the healing knowledge that had been passed down through generations. But even the garden couldn't shield Azuka from the harshness of Kimi's reign in the house. Every task Azuka performed seemed to be an invitation for criticism. It started with small remarks, how Azuka hadn't swept the floor properly or how her clothes were always a little too dirty. But soon Kemi's temper began to boil over for the smallest of reasons. One day Azuka was tasked with preparing a mixture of herbs for a potion Kemi was making for a customer. She had seen her mother do it 1,000 times and was sure she could handle it. But as Azuka carefully measured out the herbs, her hand trembled slightly and a small jar slipped from her grasp, spilling its contents onto the floor. It wasn't a disaster, nothing that couldn't be cleaned up, but Kimi's reaction was swift and furious. "You are hopeless," Kimi shouted, her voice rising to a terrifying volume. "You can't do anything right. How many times do I have to tell you that you're no use here? All you do is make things worse." Azuka's heart raced as Kemi's words pierced through her, each one a fresh wound. She opened her mouth to apologize, to explain that she hadn't meant to make a mistake, but Kemi wasn't listening. The words came faster and louder, and before Azuka knew what was happening, Kemi grabbed her by the arm and yanked her toward the door. "I'm done with you," Kemi hissed. "I've tried to be patient with you, but you've pushed me too far. Pack your things and leave. You are no longer welcome here." Azuka's breath caught in her throat. She looked to her father, desperate for any sign that he would intervene, that he would protect her as he once had. But Uzochi stood in the corner silent as ever, his eyes not meeting hers. His face was a blank canvas devoid of emotion. He said nothing. His silence, more than anything, cut deeper than any words could. In that moment, Azuka realized that her father had chosen Kemi over her, that he had silently agreed to her abandonment. With trembling hands, Azuka gathered her few belongings. She didn't even know where she would go. The streets seemed like a vast and terrifying place for a child to be, but the thought of staying in that house under Kemi's control was too unbearable. Her father, the man who should have defended her, remained silent as she left, and that silence was the loudest sound of all. As the door closed behind her, Azuka stood in the darkened night, the weight of her father's betrayal pressing down on her. She was alone. Her only choice now was to survive, but even as fear and uncertainty gripped her heart, a spark of determination flickered within. She would face the world on her own terms, and she would never let anyone take away her sense of self again. The chill of the night air settled over Azuka as she stood outside her family's home, the door shutting behind her with a finality that sent a shockwave through her heart. The village of Eloramo, which had once felt like a safe haven, now seemed foreign and hostile. The world was suddenly so vast, so full of danger, and Azuka felt as though she had been cast adrift in it without a paddle. She clutched the small bundle of belongings in her arms, a tattered cloth with a few coins, some herbs, and a worn journal that her mother had once used to document her healing recipes. It was all she had left of her mother and of the life she had known. Azuka didn't know where to go, but she couldn't stand there on the dark street any longer. She moved swiftly, her small feet barely making a sound on the cold earth. The moon hung high in the sky, casting a silver glow on the dirt roads that led out of the village. She walked aimlessly, too stunned to think clearly. Her mind was racing, her chest tight with the raw pain of abandonment. Where was she supposed to go now? What was she supposed to do? The streets were dangerous for someone her age, full of threats and hardships she had never imagined before. But there was no turning back. By the time she reached the edge of the village, Azuka's feet ached, and the small bundle she carried seemed to weigh a ton. She couldn't remember the last time she had eaten, and the emptiness in her stomach felt like a gnawing beast. The distant hum of the village behind her faded, and she found herself walking deeper into the unknown. The first few nights were the hardest. Azuka had no place to sleep but the cold ground or the crumbling remains of old huts. She had to fight back tears as she huddled under a blanket she had borrowed from a stall in the market, the night air biting at her skin. The hunger was the worst part. She had always been used to her mother's nourishing meals, herbs brewed into delicious soups. But now all she had were the few coins in her pocket. Those coins barely bought her anything, and food seemed a luxury far out of reach. But Azuka was a survivor. Her mother had always told her that resilience was the key to overcoming any challenge, and that wisdom became Azuka's guiding light. She had learned the art of healing from a young age, and she knew the value of herbs, how they could soothe hunger, ease pain, and provide the nutrients needed to stay alive. Azuka scoured the fields and forests, searching for plants her mother had once taught her about, and using them to craft simple yet effective remedies. She began to trade small portions of her herbs and potions for food, slowly gaining the trust of the villagers around El Oramo. Though the nights were still long and lonely, Azuka grew stronger. Her sharp mind and knowledge of healing were her greatest assets, and they became the foundation upon which she began to build a new life. Word of her skills spread quickly, and before long she was known as the young healer of El Oramo, a girl who had survived the streets and returned with knowledge and remedies that people desperately needed. Azuka never forgot the lessons her mother had taught her, but now they became more than just knowledge. They became her ticket to survival, to independence, and eventually to success. Despite the progress she was making, Azuka knew the journey wasn't over. Her heart still carried the weight of abandonment, and she knew that the wounds her father and stepmother had inflicted on her would take time to heal. But Azuka was no longer the frightened child who had been cast out. She was a woman in the making, learning to stand on her own 2 feet, armed with nothing but the wisdom passed down by her mother and the fierce determination to overcome whatever the world threw at her. Years passed, and Azuka's resilience began to bear fruit. The young girl who had once wandered the streets with nothing but a handful of herbs and a heavy heart had transformed into a confident young woman. She was no longer known as the poor abandoned child. She was Azuka, the village healer who had overcome unimaginable odds. She had learned to barter her skills in ways that made her respected and sought after, not just in El Oramo, but in the surrounding villages as well. It wasn't just the simple remedies that people came to her for. Azuka had honed her craft, becoming an expert in a wide variety of treatments. From potions that healed the sick to salves that soothed aching muscles, she had earned a reputation for her talent and dedication. Word spread quickly, and before long, people came from distant places to seek her out. The small shop she had built, nestled on the outskirts of El Oramo, became a hub for those in need of her healing hands. But Azuka's ambitions didn't stop there. As her skills grew, so did her dreams. She realized that the knowledge she had learned from her mother could be applied in other ways. The village needed more than just remedies. It needed stability, jobs, and opportunities for people to thrive. Azuka wasn't content with simply surviving. She wanted to build something bigger, something that would last. She expanded her business, branching out into textiles, agriculture, and even beauty products made from the natural herbs she had collected over the years. Her first step was to partner with local farmers, offering them guidance on how to cultivate the plants she used in her healing remedies. They began to produce crops on a larger scale, providing her with the raw materials she needed. Soon, Azuka's business was flourishing, and with it, the lives of the people around her. She wasn't just a healer. She was a leader who used her knowledge to create jobs, boost the local economy, and provide opportunities for those who had once been as desperate as she had been. Her story was an inspiration to everyone in El Oramo. She had not only survived, she had thrived. As her businesses expanded, so did her influence. She became the CEO of several companies, each of which focused on different aspects of her growing empire. Her ventures ranged from organic beauty products to herbal teas, all built on the foundation of the knowledge she had inherited from her mother. Azuka's name was now known far and wide, and she had earned the respect of the wealthiest merchants, the most influential healers, and even the elders of El Oramo. She had transformed from a poor abandoned girl into one of the most successful women in the land. But success did not erase the pain of her past. Though Azuka had achieved more than she had ever dreamed possible, the wounds left by her father's abandonment and Kemi's cruelty still festered deep within her. Every time she looked in the mirror, she saw not only the confident woman she had become, but also the child who had been rejected by the only family she had known. The scars of betrayal were not something she could simply shake off. Despite her triumphs, Azuka carried a quiet, unspoken pain with her. Her heart had hardened over the years, and while she had learned to forgive, she had never forgotten. The memory of her father's silence and Kimi's harshness remained a bitter reminder of the family she had lost. Azuka often wondered what would have happened if her father had stood up for her, if he had shown even a fraction of the love and care she had once known. But those thoughts were fleeting. She had learned that she couldn't change the past, and the only thing that mattered now was the future she was building for herself and for those who depended on her. Azuka's rise to power was a testament to her strength, her determination, and her ability to turn even the most painful moments into fuel for her success. She was no longer just a healer. She was a force in the world, a woman who had carved out a place for herself in a world that had once rejected her. And now she was ready for whatever came next, knowing that no matter how difficult the journey, she would always rise again. Years had passed since Azuka had walked away from the life she had once known, and she had built an empire in the time that followed. Her name was no longer whispered with pity, it was spoken with respect and admiration. Azuka had become the embodiment of resilience, a self-made woman whose businesses spanned many sectors. From healing remedies to agricultural ventures, her influence had grown, and her wealth was now unmatched. Yet despite her success, her past still lingered like a shadow. One cold morning, as Azuka sat in her luxurious office overlooking the sprawling city, she received an unexpected visitor. Her assistant informed her that two figures from her past had come seeking an audience. Azuka's heart sank when she heard their names, Uzochi and Kimi. At first, Azuka didn't know what to think. She had not seen or heard from her father or stepmother in years. She had assumed that they had faded into obscurity, a distant chapter in her life. But now they were standing at her door, desperate and pleading for her help. The meeting was set and Azuka braced herself. She had been prepared for this moment, though she had never truly expected it to come. She had thought, perhaps naively, that her father and stepmother would never cross her path again. But life had a way of throwing unexpected curves, and she knew this moment was inevitable. She would have to face them whether she was ready or not. When Uzochi and Kemi walked into her office, Azuka barely recognized them. Her father's once strong frame had been bent with age, his hair now streaked with gray, his eyes clouded with regret. Kemi too had changed. Her once proud posture was now slumped, her face weary and hollow. Both of them looked like shadows of the people they had once been. Gone were the confident, haughty airs they had carried when Azuka had been a child. Now they were broken, defeated, and standing before her with nothing but sorrow in their eyes. Kemi spoke first, her voice trembling. "Azuka, please, we've lost everything. We have nothing left. You're our only hope. Please forgive us." Azuka's eyes narrowed, but she said nothing. Her gaze moved from Kemi to Uzochi. The silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. She could see the desperation in their faces, the years of hardship and regret etched into every line of their skin. But it was not enough. It was too little, too late. Uzochi, his voice cracking, finally spoke. "I was wrong, Azuka. I see that now. I should have protected you. I should have stood up for you. But I didn't, and I lost you because of it. I am sorry. Please, help us." Azuka's heart tightened at the sight of her father's tears, but the pain she felt was too deep to simply forgive. The betrayal of her childhood was still fresh in her mind, the years of neglect, the silence when she needed him most, the cold dismissal from both him and Kemi. She had faced the harsh world alone, had fought for her survival, and had built something from nothing. No apology could erase the years of suffering she had endured. "You chose her over me," Azuka said quietly, her voice steady but firm. "You chose to stay silent when she threw me out. You could have stopped her, but you didn't. You let me go, and now you come here asking for my help." Kimi lowered her eyes, her face flushed with shame. But Uzochi's gaze remained steady on his daughter. "Azuka, I didn't know what to do. I was lost without your mother. And when Kimi came into our lives, I thought she could feel the emptiness. I was wrong." The pain in his words was raw, but Azuka remained unmoved. She had spent so many years learning to live without them, to become strong in spite of their absence. She had built her empire without their help, and she would not be dragged back into the past. "I can't help you," Azuka said coldly. "You had your chance, you made your choices, and I made mine. I don't owe you anything." With that, she turned her back on them, her heart heavy with the weight of the decision. She knew it was the right one. She had moved on, had found peace in her own success. The road to forgiveness was a long one, and she was not ready to walk it. As Uzochi and Kemi left her office, their heads bowed in shame, Azuka felt a sense of finality wash over her. She had closed that chapter of her life for good. It was painful, yes, but it was also liberating. Azuka had risen from the ashes of her past, and she would not let anyone, no matter how familiar, drag her back into the fire. Though Azuka had closed the door on her past, the weight of her experiences never truly left her. Her success brought her external peace, but internally, the scars of abandonment still lingered. The encounters with her father and stepmother had forced her to confront emotions she had long buried, the feelings of worthlessness, rejection, and betrayal. While she had built her life on her own, the bitter taste of how she had been treated still tainted her heart. She often found herself reflecting on her father's words, wondering if he truly understood the depth of the pain he had caused. But as time went on, Azuka realized something crucial. No apology could undo the years of neglect. She could forgive them, but it didn't mean she had to invite them back into her life. Forgiveness was a personal journey, one that she was still learning to navigate. However, the freedom she felt by not holding on to the past was undeniable. Letting go didn't mean forgetting. It meant releasing the power those old wounds held over her. In the quiet moments of reflection, Azuka found herself wondering what her mother would have thought. She had always imagined her mother's gentle wisdom guiding her through life's hardships. Now, more than ever, she wished for her mother's presence to offer comfort, a reminder that even the hardest battles could be faced with grace. But life, as Azuka had learned, was not about waiting for a savior to appear. It was about becoming that savior for yourself. Azuka's success had given her everything she had dreamed of, but it also reminded her of the loneliness that sometimes crept in the quietest moments of her life. While her businesses flourished and she commanded respect from those around her, there were times when the emptiness of not having a true family tugged at her heart. She had become accustomed to being strong and self-reliant, but even the most powerful individuals can long for connection. One day, as Azuka sat in her office looking out over the sprawling cityscape, she received a letter that would change everything. It was from an orphanage in a neighboring town, asking for help with their program for abandoned children. The letter spoke of the hardships faced by children who had been left behind by families just as she had. Something stirred deep within Azuka, a spark she hadn't felt in years. She knew what it was like to feel abandoned, to be cast aside with no one to turn to. In that moment, Azuka made a decision that would alter the course of her life. She would use her wealth, influence, and resources to build a safe haven for children like herself, children who had no one to depend on. She would create a place where they could heal, grow, and thrive. It was time to use her success to give back, to offer the love and guidance she had longed for in her own childhood. Azuka didn't need to forgive her father or stepmother to make this choice. The pain they had caused her would never fully fade, but in that pain, she found the strength to create something greater than herself. She realized that the wounds of her past had given her the empathy and drive to help others who had suffered the same fate. Advice and moral of this story. Azuka's journey teaches us that no matter how difficult our past may be, we always have the power to rise above it. Her resilience and determination remind us that our circumstances don't define us, our actions, choices, and strength to move forward do. While it's natural to seek validation and forgiveness from those who hurt us, true healing often comes from within. Holding on to bitterness and regret only keeps us tethered to the past. Sometimes we must let go and choose our own path, even if it means walking away from those who failed us. Remember, the greatest power lies in our ability to rebuild ourselves and find peace in our own success on our own terms. We've come to the end of this story. Please subscribe to my channel to support me. Thank you.